I never wanted much from life beyond peace, and for a while, I truly believed I had finally found it. After years of hustling in the city, working double shifts, saving every penny, I purchased a 20-acre stretch of land outside town. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. My farmhouse was old and worn, with faded paint and a roof that whined in the wind, but I renovated it board by board, nail by nail, until it felt alive again. Every morning, I'd wake before the sun, brew coffee, and step onto my porch to breathe in the dew-soaked air. The world felt quiet out there, untouched by the noise of deadlines, car horns, and city arguments. Even the silence seemed like a gift. For the first time in my life, I thought I had escaped all the pettiness of people. My days fell into a rhythm that felt sacred. I tilled the soil and grew rows of tomatoes, beans, and corn, not for profit, but because working the earth made me feel grounded. I kept a few chickens that clucked lazily in the yard, and every evening I'd sit back in my rocking chair, listening to the cicadas hum in the trees. Sometimes neighbors passing by on their jogs would wave politely, and I'd wave back, thinking nothing more of it. Nobody bothered me, and I bothered no one. I didn't ask for trouble, didn't go out of my way to make noise, and yet deep down, I always knew peace never lasts forever. My grandfather used to say, "There's always someone who can't stand to see you happy." I didn't believe him then, I do now. The first intrusion came on a Saturday morning. I had just finished mowing and was wiping the sweat from my forehead when I heard sharp knocking, no, banging on my front door. Standing there was a woman I had never met before. She was dressed in a stiff beige cardigan, clutching a clipboard like a weapon, and her eyes scanned me as if I were some sort of trespasser. "You can't park that truck there," she announced without so much as a greeting, pointing at my old pickup parked neatly in my own driveway. Her voice was sharp, clipped, carrying the kind of authority that doesn't ask, it demands. I frowned, unsure if this was some kind of prank. "Excuse me?" I said slowly, still half expecting her to laugh and introduce herself properly. Instead, she crossed her arms and raised her chin with smug certainty. "This neighborhood has standards," she declared, "and we enforce them." The way she said "we" made my stomach tighten. I asked her who exactly she was, and she wasted no time giving her title like it was royalty. "I'm Karen," she said proudly, "president of the HOA. I blinked at her, confused. "HOA? I didn't sign up for anything like that. This is my property." Her lips curled into a thin smile, the kind people wear when they know something you don't. "Oh, you'll find out soon enough," she said before turning on her heel and marching back down my driveway like she owned it. That night, as I was closing up, I noticed an envelope tucked under my door. It looked official, stamped with a crest and bold lettering, "Notice of violation." I tore it open and read in disbelief, "500 fine for unsightly vehicle." My unsightly vehicle being the truck I relied on for hauling wood, groceries, and everything else I needed to live. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the paper, my stomach knotting. Could this even be real? I hadn't agreed to join any association. How could they possibly fine me for parking on my own driveway? My chest tightened with anger. But even more than that, confusion. Something about this didn't add up, and yet, the paper in my hand told me this woman wasn't bluffing. The next morning, as I walked down the road, one of my neighbors, an older man out walking his dog, leaned in close and whispered without even looking me in the eye. "Don't cross her," he muttered. "She'll bleed you dry." Before I could ask what he meant, he tugged his dog away and hurried off, leaving me standing in the middle of the road with more questions than answers. I looked back at my land, the house I had rebuilt with my own hands, the soil I had poured my sweat into, the porch where I thought I would finally grow old in peace. A creeping unease began to settle into my chest like storm clouds, gathering over the horizon. That $500 fine wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration of war. And the woman who had delivered it wasn't going to stop at one battle. The weeks that followed felt like a slow unraveling of the peace I once cherished. Almost every morning, I'd find a new envelope taped to my front door, each one more absurd than the last. At first, it was a $2,000 fine for painting my shed the wrong shade of brown, as if the wood I'd carefully stained with my own two hands was somehow offensive to the world. Then came a $5,000 fine for having unauthorized crops, the very garden that had fed me and the neighbors who weren't too proud to accept fresh tomatoes in the summer. Soon after, another $10,000 fine appeared because my cousin left his car on my gravel driveway overnight. Every slip of paper felt like another knife in the back, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't about rules at all. It was about control. I tried to fight it at first, tried to reason with them the way a sane man reasons with another human being. I called the number listed on the violation notices and got Karen herself. "Ma'am," I began calmly, "this is my land, my home. Can we not sit down and figure this out like neighbors?" Her reply was sharp and cold, her words cutting through the phone like glass. "If you can't afford to live up to our community's standards, maybe you don't belong here." I sat there in silence, stunned at the gall. The conversation ended with her hanging up, leaving me gripping the phone with shaking hands. It wasn't about standards. It wasn't about community. It was about her, Karen, and her desire to remind me, every chance she got, that she believed she held power over me. It wasn't just the fines anymore. It was the constant surveillance. I'd look out my window and catch glimpses of cars creeping by, their drivers snapping pictures of my yard, my garden, even the truck I drove to work. Neighbors who once waved politely now crossed the street when they saw me coming. I overheard whispers when I walked past. "He's not going to last here," or should have just followed the rules. Every word sliced deeper than the fines themselves, because it wasn't just Karen anymore. It was the whole neighborhood, watching me, waiting for me to fall. My land, my sanctuary, had become a cage with eyes pressed against the bars. The breaking point came with the certified letter, delivered by hand so there would be no denying it. I opened it slowly, my fingers trembling, and stared at the total, $250,000 in accumulated violations. My stomach dropped, my legs nearly gave out. The letter stated plainly that if I didn't pay within 30 days, foreclosure proceedings would begin. My land, the home I had poured my sweat and soul into, would be ripped away from me by signatures, on paper and the smug will of a woman who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be crushed. I sat at my kitchen table with the letter spread before me, feeling like every ounce of breath had been stolen from my chest. That night I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I paced the creaking wooden floorboards of my farmhouse, the walls pressing in closer with every step. My mind kept flashing back to my grandfather's words, stories of how our family had fought tooth and nail, just to hold on to land through decades of hardship, prejudice, and manipulation. Were all those battles about to be erased because one HOA president decided my truck was unsightly? Rage mixed with despair, a storm building in my chest. I felt helpless. But something inside me, some buried instinct, refused to lie down and surrender. If they wanted a war, then I had to find a way to fight one. Desperation drove me to the dusty box in my closet where I kept every deed, every scrap of paperwork my grandfather left behind. I spread them across the table and pored over the words by lamplight, my eyes scanning legal jargon I barely understood. Hours passed until suddenly my heart stopped on one detail. The boundaries on the deed didn't just cover my 20 acres. They covered more, much more. Every cul-de-sac, every lawn, every neatly painted McMansion, built in the last 40 years, sat on land my family still owned the rights to. My breath caught in my throat as realization set in. The HOA thought they were bleeding me dry, but all along, the ground beneath their feet was mine. The night before the next HOA meeting, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the numbers, the fines, the laughter in Karen's voice when she told me I didn't belong. But now, I had something she didn't expect. Proof. I tucked the deed into a worn leather folder and stared at it like it was a weapon. My weapon. The paper was old, edges frayed, but the ink was clear as daylight. Every name, every signature, every boundary line was there, untouched. I imagined the look on Karen's face when I revealed it, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of control. This wasn't just defense anymore, it was offense. The community center was packed when I walked in. Neighbors filled every chair, murmuring to each other, some throwing quick glances my way like I was already guilty. Karen stood at the podium, her voice dripping with satisfaction as she waved a stack of papers. "This member has racked up over $250,000 in violations. If he cannot pay, foreclosure proceedings will begin immediately." Her friends on the board nodded along, their smug faces lit with approval. My pulse hammered in my ears, but I stood tall. When she finished, I raised my hand slowly, the room quieting as every eye turned to me. "Actually, Karen," I said, my voice steady though my heart was racing, "you might want to sit down." A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. Karen's smirk didn't falter, but I saw the slight twitch in her jaw. I walked forward, laid my folder on the table, and spread out the deed. Gasps filled the room as I explained what I had discovered. This neighborhood exists because of this document. My grandfather never signed away land rights, which means every house, every yard, every square foot you're sitting on, technically still belongs to my family. The words echoed, heavy and sharp, like stones dropped into water. Karen's face went pale, though she tried to mask it with a laugh. That's impossible. Some kind of clerical mistake. But her voice cracked at the edges, betraying her fear. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. Try me. Keep piling up those fines, and I'll start charging rent for every inch of land you and your neighbors occupy. Starting with you, Madam President. Murmurs turned into open gasps, and people twisted in their seats to glare at Karen. A man in the back shouted, "Is this true?" Another woman whispered, "We're living on his land." The tide was shifting, and Karen could feel it slipping from her grip. Neighbors who had avoided me for months now muttered under their breath. Not at me, but at her. One woman stood up and snapped, "Karen, what did you drag us into?" Another hissed, "You said you had everything under control." The board members looked nervous, exchanging glances, suddenly unsure if standing beside her was safe anymore. Karen's hands trembled as she tried to gather her papers, her voice rising in desperation. "We'll fight this in court. He's bluffing." But her words had lost their sting. She no longer sounded like the enforcer. She sounded like the one cornered. I gathered my deed back into the folder, sliding it under my arm with deliberate calm. My eyes swept across the room, catching neighbors staring with wide eyes, torn between anger and awe. Some whispered apologies, others kept silent, guilt etched into their faces. For the first time since this nightmare began, the air felt different. The fear wasn't mine anymore, it was theirs. As I walked out of the community center, the sound of voices rose behind me, a mix of shouting, pleading, and accusing. My steps were steady, my chest lifted. Whatever came next, Karen and her board now knew the truth. The ground they stood on was mine, and the war they started had only just begun. What would you do if an HOA slapped you with $250,000 in fines? Do you think I went too far or not far enough when I revealed the truth? Should I forgive the neighbors who stayed silent, or make them pay rent for living on my land? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that like button if you think Karen got what she deserved, and don't forget to subscribe, because the next HOA story is even wilder than this one.